Oregon Territory, spring 1869. Dust swirls around a ramshackle trading post somewhere along the endless Oregon Trail. The air carries the smell of weathered wood, animal hide, and cheap whiskey. Men with calloused palms and empty stares cluster around a crude platform, nothing more than old boards thrown across some supply crates. This is the kind of place where hope comes to die. A weathered man sporting a tarnished star pounds his gavel against a wooden post. "Final lot of the day," he calls out. "Mystery package here. Won't give her name. Face stays covered since we picked her up back in Missouri. Claims she work hard and follow orders. We're starting at $2. Anyone feeling lucky enough to take a gamble on what's underneath?" Cruel laughter cuts through the air like broken glass. "Could be a hag hiding under there," someone yells. Another voice chimes in. "Maybe she's already dead." A few men lose interest and wander off, while others linger for the entertainment. Standing on those makeshift boards, she remains motionless. No shoes, covered in trail dust, wrists tied with rough rope. A burlap covering completely hides her head, knotted securely at her throat. Her rapid, shallow breathing gives away her terror. Her bound hands shake, fingers opening and closing in desperate rhythm. It's worthless if she won't even talk. The auctioneer mutters in frustration. The crowd stands silent. Long moments pass, then someone pushes through from the baka, towering figure in a canvas jacket, his face shadowed beneath a dark, well-worn hat. Mud cakes his heavy boots, sweat stains his shirt, and leather wraps protect his hands. This is a man who knows trees better than people. $2. His deep voice cuts through the silence. The auctioneer squints in disbelief. "You certain about this, stranger?" "I meant what I said." His tone carries no anger, no desperation, just quiet certainty. Snickers ripple through the crowd. "Must be desperate as hell." The nervous auctioneer clears his throat. "You're buying blind here, mister?" The tall man glances toward the covered woman, still as stone beneath her shroud. "Not purchasing a pretty face," he says calmly. "I'm wedding a human being." Even the wind holds its breath. No one dares laugh now. "Name," the auctioneer asks. "Pen ready?" "Silas Boone. I cut timber up at Northridge." Papers are scrawled and signed without hesitation. The official turns to address the woman. "You're now lawfully wedded, miss. State your name for our records." The burlap shifts slightly. A silence stretches. Then, so quietly that ears strain to catch it, a voice emerges. "Annabelle Crow." Silas goes rigid. The crowd leans forward. Something flickers in his eyes. Recognition, shock, then hardens back to stone. He stares at the covered figure as memories flood back. 3 winters past, snow and darkness. A voice he could never forget, but a name he'd never known. Without ceremony, he steps down and gently takes her arm, not rough, not urgent, just firm enough to say, "You're protected now." They walk away in silence, leaving whispers trailing behind them like smoke. The journey home, forest shadows swallow them as they follow the narrow trail. Sunlight barely penetrating the thick canopy above. Annabelle stays quiet, that burlap sack still secured over her head. When wind catches the edges, she quickly adjusts it with both hands. Keeping herself hidden, Silas leads their old mule several paces ahead, never turning back or attempting conversation. He simply follows the path, occasionally checking the tree line as if listening for dangers beyond the breeze. Their silence isn't uncomfortable. It's carved from different kinds of survival. They arrive at his cabin before nightfall, built from hyphla. Built from dark pine logs, it's small but solid, backed against a hill that blocks the harsh northern winds. A stone chimney rises from one end, split wood stacked neatly beside the entrance, and an old horseshoe hangs above the doorframe for luck. Silas opens the creaking door and steps aside. "Choose your own place to stand," he says quietly. "Nobody's going to position you ever again." She enters slowly, movements careful but not weak. The sack stays in place. Her footsteps whisper across the smooth wooden floor. Instead of sitting at his table, she crouches against the far wall, back to the room, arms wrapped around her knees. He follows, dropping firewood near the hearth and working at the stove without questions or commands. Soon rich aromas fill the space. Spices, cinnamon, salted meat. He moves with practiced rhythm, as if he's prepared solitary meals countless times before. When food is ready, he places a bowl near her spot. She flinches, but doesn't turn. He settles at the table with his own portion, neither rushing nor staring. After several minutes, her muffled voice asks, "What is this?" Silas looks down at his bowl, stirs once. "I call it survivor's stew," he says. "Used to make it for myself after brutal days in the forest. Then I started preparing 2 servings, even with nobody around to eat the second."
Ow.
She turns her head, slightly peering beneath the sack's edge. On the chair beside him sits another identical bowl, steam rising from untouched food. "I used to set that extra bowl for my wife after the war," he continues, "after the trees started taking more than they gave. It's just my way of saying I made it home alive another day."
Ow.
He pauses. "Tonight I'm setting it for you and for her memory." Silence. Holds the room, fire crackles. Slowly, Annabelle reaches for her bowl. Her hands tremble slightly, but she grips the spoon and manages to eat beneath the covering. Small careful bites, but she finishes everything that night, while Silas cleans. Dishes in a tin basin, Annabelle remains by the wall, knees drawn up, watching without speaking. But for the first time since he'd met her, she wasn't shaking. Memories in the firelight after the fire died, 2 glowing embers and supper dishes were cleaned. Silas sat alone before the hearth. No lantern-burned firelight was enough, casting dancing shadows along the log walls like silent ghosts from his past. Outside, wind moaned through the trees with familiar loneliness. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, letting warmth touch his face. But warmth wasn't all he felt. 3 years back, during the worst winter in memory cold, that turned pine needles to ice and breath to fire, greed for good timber had driven him. Too far north, pride made him stubborn. He'd slipped on steep ground, twisted his leg badly, and tumbled into deep snow where no paths existed. By the time snow covered his back, he'd stopped struggling for life. Then hands rough, working hands pulled him free. He remembered pain, his body dragging across rocks, then darkness. He'd awakened to firelight in a small cave hidden behind frozen curtains. Flames crackled beside him, and strange smells filled his nose, earthy bitter, like boiled tree bark. Across from him sat a figure, a woman, with her face hidden beneath carefully tied sackcloth, just like the covering now in his cabin. She wore layers of salvaged wool and leather, boots stitched from scraps. Her hands moved with purpose as she poured steaming liquid into a tin cup. When she spoke, her voice was neither high nor low, only soft, measured, weary. "You don't need to know my identity," she'd said, "but I won't let you die." He'd tried to respond, but no words came. "Drink this," she'd continued. "Pine bark and dried moss. It'll fight the fever." He remembered the bitter taste, but he'd drunk. She'd bound his leg, positioned it against heated stones, maintained the fire through the night. He'd drifted in and out, battling cold, pain, and whatever dreams tried to steal his life away. When morning came, cruel and blushy, was gone. Only the guarded fire remained, and beside it, folded neatly, lay a small cloth square embroidered with purple flowers in uneven thread. No larger than his palm. A token, or perhaps a message. He'd kept it, still carried it in his coat pocket. And now, behind him in the cabin, sat a woman with the same voice, the same gentle hands, the same sackcloth covering, and finally a name: Annabelle. Crow? He closed his eyes, leaning deeper into the fire's warmth. No proof was needed. He'd felt it the instant she'd spoken at that auction stage. Not the name, the sound. The woman who'd saved him hadn't wanted to be in or known. Here she was again, still hidden, still nameless to the world, but not to him. He didn't tell her that night. He let the memory live inside him, a quiet agreement between past and present, glancing back toward the small shape huddled by the far wall sack, still covering her head, back still turned. The same fear, the same need to disappear. But this time, Silas thought, she wasn't alone. Maybe that was the beginning of something that could survive beyond winter's grip. Morning's first light dawn mist clung to the forest roots, like shy secrets. Soft wind whispered through high branches, as if even nature didn't want to disturb the peace. Annabelle stepped outside alone, arms folded across her middle, walking toward the tall pine that stood guard at the clearing's edge, the sack still covered. Her head, but her steps had gained steadiness. Her spine straightened not with pride, but no longer bent with shame. At the tree's base, she settled and turned her face toward early sunlight cutting through branches. With trembling hands, she loosened the knot behind her neck. The sack lifted, just enough to let her breathe freely, mouthed nose, a sliver of cheek exposed to the wind. This wasn't defiance. This was a beginning. From the side yard where he knelt oiling his saw teeth, Silas noticed her. He didn't stand or call out, but spoke low and steady, as if addressing the trees themselves. I got hurt badly once, deep in winter, lost near Black Ridge, should have died out there. His fingers moved over the blade, cleaning methodically. But someone found me, dragged me into a cave, saved my life. Annabelle didn't turn. She wore a sack over her head, wouldn't say her name, barely let me see her hands. He paused. Remember her voice? He turned his head slightly, not to face her directly, but to let his words carry fuller. Your voice sounds exactly like hers. Stillness settled, then came the soft scratch of fabric sliding over skin. He didn't move, not even when he felt her eyes on him. When he finally looked up, she stared straight at him. The sack lay in her lap. Her face wasn't deformed or monstrous. It was human, but marked. A long, curved scar ran from her right temple, two just above her jawline. Not fresh or bleeding, but deep and permanent. As though cruel fingers had tried to claw something from her that wouldn't come free, she met his gaze without hiding it, but without pride either. Only bare truth. Her voice came in whispers. The man who owned the boarding house where I worked told me I could keep my room if I gave him extras. She swallowed hard. I refused. He didn't appreciate that answer. Looking down briefly then, back to Silas. He came at me. I fought back, pushed him. He slipped and hit his head on the stove. She stared past him into memory. He died. I ran. Silas's jaw tightened, but he remained quiet. They claimed I murdered him on purpose, that I seduced him, that it was all planned. Her voice wavered. No witnesses existed. Nobody believed my story. She examined her own hands. They branded me a liar, a temptress, a killer. Silas rose. Wiping his hands on cloth, Annabelle continued in low, even tones. They sold me to pay his debts, passed me from hand to hand like livestock. They covered my face to make it simpler, to make me nothing. She looked at the sack in her lap. I wore this so people wouldn't see me as poison, so they wouldn't spot the scar and judge my worth before I spoke. Looking up again, eyes glassy but fierce. I never asked to be rescued, never asked to be bought, but I'm tired of hiding. Silas didn't step forward or touch her. He only nodded. Thank you for telling me. Your voice was steady, warm, real. You didn't have to, but you chose to. She blinked hard, but no tears fell, only breath. And in that breath, something shifted. For the first time since arriving, she wasn't a shadow. She was a woman with a name, a story, and a face. Silas had seen all three and turned away from none. The gift of choice next morning's sun crept slowly through the forest. Golden and tentative light spilling through the narrow window above their table, dust particles spun lazily in the beam like tiny spirits dancing between the wood-grain walls. Inside the cabin, stillness prevailed, not from fear anymore, but from understanding. Like breath held after something fragile has been shared and carefully received. Annabelle had barely spoken since yesterday, but she hadn't reached for the sack. No longer did she pull it over her head before sleeping or keep it folded at her beds. Foot like a shield awaiting battle. Her untied, tangled hair lay quietly against her shoulders as she rose from the cot. Her steps remained cautious. Posture guarded, but something in her presence had shifted. Something small, like ground thawing beneath snow. She blinked at light pouring through the window and moved toward the table, expecting the usual coffee tin, wooden bowl, leftover spoon. Instead, she stopped short. Something new waited for her, eh? Small mirror stood upright, silver-framed, aged at the edges but polished clear. It leaned against a smooth pine wedge, angled perfectly to catch rising sunlight for illumination. Odd exposure. Beside it hung a scar of sea-green silk, slightly faded but soft and carefully folded, like it had once been treasured. Maybe still. Was no note or gesture pointed toward these items, just the mirror and scarf placed as if they'd always belonged on that table, as if she'd always been meant to find them? She stared at the objects for a long time, not moving at first. The stove. Fire had died low. Only crackling old pine and occasional beam creaks filled the room. Outside, the forest began stirring a jay's rustle and branches. Slow dripping of dew from eaves, she approached the table slowly, afraid the mirror might reflect something unbearable. But when she reached it, she looked. What she saw wasn't new. She'd felt her face hundreds of times since her world cracked open. She knew the scar's ridges, path it carved down her cheek like an uninvited brand. Her hand lifted, touching the mark lightly, the way one might touch a name carved in stone, familiar, inevitable. But this time, under sunlight through clean glass, she didn't flinch. The scar remained, always would, but so did the woman behind it. Her gaze shifted to the scarf. She lifted it with both hands. It slipped through her fingers like river water, cool, gentle, kind. Care was stitched into every fiber. She brought it to her head, not to hide the scar, but to shape what others would see, to soften the outline, to control her own image, not from shame, but from choice. The scarf settled like it belonged there. In the mirror, a new figure emerged. Not the hunted girl from the auction, not the ghost from the snowstorm, but a woman complete, upright, still carrying what she'd lived through, but no longer buried by it. Behind her came a sound soft boots on plank wood. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. Silas stood in the doorway, one shoulder leaning against the frame. He'd entered without words, as was his way, but his expression showed quiet reverence. He tilted his chin toward the scarf. That belonged to my wife, he said steadily. She wore it whenever she needed to feel like herself again. Annabelle's fingers brushed the silk near her temple. I thought maybe it would suit you too, he added. She turned slightly toward him, not flinching, not defending. He held her gaze, unwavering. Then, with a voice as soft as moss and just as anchoring, he said, anyone who tries to shame you for what you've survived is blind. A beat passed, and the blind don't get to judge beauty. Her throat tightened. Tears came slow but warm, not sharp or desperate, but cleansing. She looked at herself again, then gently reached out and laid her palm flat against the mirror. Meeting her reflection halfway, for the first time in a very long time, Annabelle Crow let herself be seen. The hunter arrives, the piece they'd carved in the woods didn't last unchallenged. It never did in these parts. Trouble arrived on horseback, riding solo beneath a storm-bruised sky. The man was lean and long-legged, his duster torn from trail wind and hard miles, gray eyes, sharp and merciless, cut through saloon crowds like a blade through soft hide. He called himself Cutter, and he wasn't any drifter. This was a bounty hunter who could read tracks like scripture and smell secrets beneath lies. Rumors had drifted from southern trails, a scarred girl hiding in the hills, face once covered, now showing. Someone whispered she had blood on her hands and a lumberman for protection. Cutter listened. Then he rode. By the time he reached the logging post near North Ridge, he was asking dangerous questions. He posed as a lost traveler seeking work with the timber crews, claimed he'd heard about a man named Boone living deep in the woods. Silas met him by chance near the supply shed. One look told him everything, not by words, but by the way Cutter scanned the tree line, the stillness in his stance, the stillness of a snake before striking. That evening, Silas returned to the cabin, his face colder than the wind. "He's hunting you," he said simply. Annabelle didn't speak at first. She stood by the stove, stirring soup that had gone thin with worry. Her eyes were steady, but distant. Then, without a word, she crossed the room, opened the wooden chest at the cot's foot, and pulled out the old sackcloth, folded neatly, untouched since the morning she'd shed it. She held it for a long time. "I'll wear it again," she said quietly. "One final time." Silas looked at her. "You don't have to." Her eyes met his. "This time I choose it. Not for shame, for strategy." They planned together that night. Annabelle would ride east through the old fire. Rode wearing the sack. Cutter would follow. He wouldn't resist a scarred girl alone. Covered, a ghost reborn. Silas would take the mountain pass, ride across, and meet the sheriff in town, if their plan worked. Cutter would follow her straight into their trap. At dawn, with sky barely blushing, Annabelle mounted Silas's second horse and rode out, sack tight. Over her head, heart pounding. She didn't tremble this time. She looked forward. By sundown, Cutter had taken the bait, following her deep into eastern rocks where Silas waited with the sheriff and 2 ridge patrolmen. Cutter drew first, but not fast enough. He was disarmed, bound, thrown over his own horses. Back, charged with unlawful pursuit, attempted assault, intent to kill. Annabelle watched from the hilltop, form still hidden beneath the sack. Only after Cutter was gone did she ride down. When she reached Silas, he stepped forward to help her dismount. She let him. Slowly, she reached up and untied the knot at her neck's base. The sack slipped free. She folded it once, twice, then held it in both hands, staring at the fabric. Silas watched, unsure what she would do. She looked up, expression quiet but no longer afraid. "It saved me one last time," she said. "Not because it hid me, but because I used it." He nodded. "What will you do with it now?" She looked at the trees, at the fading trail, at the world she'd once moved through like a shadow. She folded the sack once more and tucked it beneath her arm. "I'll keep it," she said softly. "Not as a cage, but as proof." Silas raised an eyebrow. "Proof of what?" She smiled. "That even what was once my prison can become my shield if I choose it to be." For the first time there was light in her voice, not laughter's light, but the light of a woman who had lived through darkness and could now name it. The witness it was mid-afternoon when the knock came slow, its uncertain tapping. Not demanding entry, but asking permission. Silas opened the cabin door to find a woman standing on the porch. Her dress was worn and travel-stained, boots carrying red dust from long roads. Her skin was dark, posture straight, eyes cautious but kind. She held her hat with both hands. "Name's Mavis Green," she said. "I used to work at the Ridley House kitchen help, mostly cooking." Behind Silas, Annabelle stepped into the doorway and froze when she saw the woman. Mavis took a step back, then stopped herself. "I heard you were up this way," she said quietly, "and figured it was time I stopped being a coward." Wind rustled through pines as silence stretched between them. "I saw what happened that night," Mavis said. "Saw him drag you into that back room, heard you scream, heard the crash. But I didn't speak up. I needed the job, needed to eat." Annabelle's fingers tightened against the doorframe. "I'm not proud of that," Mavis continued, "but I can make it right now, if you'll let me." Later, over tea at the table, Mavis recounted everything, details only someone who'd truly been there could know. She described bruises, blood, the silence that followed. "I should have said it then," she whispered, "but I'll say it now. You were telling the truth." With Silas's help, they wrote it all down. Mavis signed the affidavit in strong, careful penmanship. The letter was sealed and sent to the nearest judicial office by horseback courier. Weeks passed. The forest grew greener, the sky warmer. Then one morning, the sheriff rode up with a single envelope in hand. Silas opened it on the porch, read it twice before walking inside. Annabelle took it in her hands. The words were few. Charges against. Annabelle Crow dropped. Case closed. Warrant rescinded. She read them again and again, then walked outside, past the firewood pile, past the horses, down to the tree line. She found the old pine where she'd once buried her sackcloth, sat at its base, running fingers through moss, breathing. She didn't cry or laugh. She just closed her eyes. In a voice barely more than breath, she said, "For the first time in my life, I don't have to run." Justice had come not with trumpets or applause, only with truth and the quiet strength of someone who had finally decided to stand beside it. New beginnings. Spring came gently to the ridge. Trees once bare and brittle now wore soft buds like promises waiting to bloom. Mist still rolled in at dawn, but thinner, lighter, as though even the fog had grown tired of hiding. Birds sang again. The river moved with purpose. Forest felt forgiving. Silas had been busy. With spare wood and quiet care, he built a modest canopy just outside the cabin, near the edge where wildflowers began claiming the grass. Nothing grand for upright beams, a simple arch draped in linen, but it stood strong like him. They invited only a few. Mavis came, smiling wide in a mismatched dress that still suited her spirit. The old blacksmith from town brought apple brandy. The shopkeeper's wife carried fresh bread and mountain lavender. Not many, but enough. Inside the cabin, Annabelle stood before the small mirror Silas had left for her months ago. Her dress was plain muslin, hand-stitched, cream-colored, but it fit perfectly because she'd made it herself with steady fingers through quiet nights. On her head she wore a veil made from the sackcloth, the same one that had once hidden her shame, fear, and name. But now it was something else. Silas had washed it, sun-dried it, cut it with care. The edges were sewn with white thread used for mending old linen, and on the corners, embroidered in faint purple, were tiny wildflowers almost identical to the one stitched into the handkerchief she'd once left behind in the snow. When she stepped out of the cabin, the forest fell still. Silas stood beneath the wooden arch, hands folded, heart full. But he'd trimmed his beard, polished his boots, ironed the only shirt he owned without sap stains, but none of that mattered when he saw her. She moved slowly, like the earth had finally given her permission to be seen. She was beautiful not because the veil covered the scar, but because she'd chosen to wear it again on her terms. As she reached him, Silas took her hands. His voice was low, but every word was steady. "No matter what covered your face," he said, "you were always the woman I chose from the start." He paused, looking into her eyes. "And now you're the woman I vow to stand beside to the end." Annabelle smiled, not with the caution of someone who'd been hurt, but with the peace of someone who'd finally healed. She whispered, "And I vow the same." There was no priest, no vows read from books, just them and the trees and the people who mattered most. When they kissed, soft and sure, the wind picked up just enough to rustle the linen overhead. A few drops of rain fell, light as breath. Mavis leaned close to the blacksmith. "Never thought I'd see burlap turned into a wedding veil." After a beat, she added, "Never thought it could be so beautiful." The blacksmith chuckled. "Ain't the sackets what she turned it into?" Later that evening, as fire crackled and laughter mingled with bird song, Annabelle sat beside Silas on the porch. The veil lay folded in her lap. She ran fingers across the embroidered edge. "Funny," she said. "This thing used to represent everything I feared." He looked over, and now she smiled. "Now, it represents everything I chose." Silas nodded, reaching over and lacing his fingers through hers. They sat that way until stars came out. The forest, once their prison, now held them like home. Epilogue: beneath the towering pines, in a vale once born of shame, Annabelle Crow and Silas Boone found what so many had lost on the frontier, peace not in forgetting the past, but in reclaiming it. Their love didn't erase the pain, the scars, or the silence, but it transformed what once bound them into something that could bless them. Because sometimes in the Wild West, survival wasn't just about holding on, it was about choosing what to hold on to. Thank you for journeying with us through this tale of redemption, courage, and quiet devotion. If stories like this stir your heart and move your soul, don't forget to subscribe to Desert Trost Tales, where love travels farther than fear and even the roughest trails can lead home. Hit that bell so you never miss our next tale. Till then, ride steady, love deeply, and remember, where bullets missed, hearts didn't.